there was, I think it was Newcastle, was it? And it was like over 20% of their wage bill went on injured players, which that to me was quite outstanding. Is that correct? And where did other teams kind of fall within that kind of? Because the way I look at it is, if you've got players out injured, obviously, unless you're bringing in new players, your wage bill is going to be the same. But it's just kind of dead money at that point. But obviously, it's the performance on the pitch that you're going to then start lacking. If your best players are out and they're not playing, that's going to have an impact on where you finish in the league. But yeah, just on that, if you can, Jason, in terms of the amount of wages percentage-wise that were spent on injured players.
Yeah, so Newcastle were, I guess, anomalously large as well. So they were about 22%. The next worst was Manchester United, who quite often feature in this as well. But that part of that is probably because they have such high wages and kind of background there. I'm sure lots of people have their opinions if the wages are spent right on people who aren't playing well. But yeah, Newcastle is a good one to talk about because last season they were decimated by injuries, and I think again one has to put it into context though of why. They had Champions League football. I don't think their squad was big enough, strong enough to be able to compete on so many fronts. So, like I said, they were about 22%. The average is probably about 11 to 15%. That's a more normal level. And then you got outstanding people like Wolves, who is another great success story. West Ham, Fulham, all the way down there, and then Bournemouth as well. And I think again, part of their success last season, they played so well, was because of their injury management. People are talking about Arsenal with their set pieces or other clubs with marginal gains. But one of the biggest marginal gains you can make is injury management, just having your players ready to play each week. So going back to the point about Newcastle, what is interesting behind the scenes, they're very well run. And I wouldn't like to criticize them because they have done phenomenal things. Yes, they've had an injection of capital with their owners, but they've done well with what they have because the kind of FFP and stuff has restricted them a lot more than the likes of Man City and Chelsea years ago. But they are at least, trying new methodologies as well. So they're working with people called Orico. So they're an AI injury company, and Orico are fantastic. They work with the players. They kind of do a lot of detailed, individualized stuff as well. But they take blood samples, they take urine samples, they take sweat samples. And so Newcastle had a high injury incidence last season. But what maybe people should be looking at is, okay, they had a really heavy season, Champions League, everything on top of that. What would have happened if Orico weren't working with them? It might be much, much higher. And so I think, we're coming at a point now in football, talking about, what we said a little bit earlier, because of the huge fixture list that we're seeing, squads are just going to have to get bigger. Players cannot keep this up. And so squads are going to have to get much, much deeper. And Newcastle were a team that unfortunately suffered because of that. Aston Villa are probably going to suffer because of that this season, whereas the likes of Arsenal, Manchester City and Liverpool and Chelsea and Man United should be up there as well. They have the financial clout, but also the squad depth to be able to be competing at this level. And unfortunately, maybe the Newcastles and the Aston Villas might be having one season in the Champions League every so often, flirting with European football. But the reality is long term, unless they can financially, delve into their pockets and be able to increase their squad size, they're just not going to have the players to be able to do that. That the players are going to run out of steam, energy, and not going to be able to compete as well.
Yeah, it's almost like, well, we've seen this with teams, particularly in the past. Like sometimes you do almost need a squad for the league, a squad for the cup, because there's just that many games. But going back to the cost as well, so just to put that into perspective, so a Premier League wage bill, if they're spending 10%, that's tens of millions of pounds a season that's just going on someone that is effectively, as bad as it sounds, useless for them during that period of time that they're out and not playing. But then there's other costs as well associated, Jason, such as you've got. See, the medical department is a big cost, whether they're spending on equipment and medicine in the club and the personnel, but also then you touched upon it earlier, like the specialists for all of these types of things. If someone gets an injury, they're not going to be waiting on the NHS list, definitely. So they're going to be flown out to a specialist. And so it all comes into cost. So the clubs themselves are going to have a big budget, I would say, to have to manage to be able to maximise their availability.